So I moved back here from Las Vegas in 1994 and logged for a couple years and then stepped back into construction. I mean, it was my native element. And one particular morning I was working on a job that was remote, 150 miles from here, up in the mountains. And it involved cutting trees and pouring concrete, and I loved it. And one morning I remember the day my boss came up to me and said, "Scott, they've given us another aspect to this job." It was on a dam, an old dam that needed some retrofit and extending the box culvert spillway and armoring the front with riprap. And as it turned out, addressing the first spillway that had been put in on that dam, I don't know, maybe 60 years before when the thing had been built. I had seen that spillway when I was snooping around the job before we really even got started. And it was like this, you got to visualize it. There was a stream running out on the north side of this dam, down at the level that would be the bottom of the reservoir. And it was coming out through the willows, and I walked back up in there in my hip boots because my boss sent me over to check it out. And there were boards across what looked like an old mine shaft. It was maybe 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall, roughly oval, with the native basalt kind of fractured around the edges. And I was wading through water that was halfway up my thighs and cold. And as I was wading up the creek, I could feel little railroad tracks, like you're in a mine shaft, under my feet in the water. And I walked up there and I pulled a couple of those boards off because the Corps of Engineers, I think that's who we were working for, wanted this old overflow blocked off with rock. So I walked in there wading in the water and looking up at the water pouring out of the ceiling because pretty soon I was back kind of underneath the reservoir and water streaming down, and I've got a hard hat and I'm dodging the worst of it. And in between the little waterfalls are these black, brown, glossy, shiny spiders. Lots of them hanging up there. And the water's deeper. It's getting up almost to the top of my hip waders. And I get back in there 60 feet to an old concrete bulkhead that had been poured to stop people from going back in. And they wanted to add to the work, add to the contract, filling that mine shaft 60 feet long with 2-inch crushed basalt clear to the ceiling. How do you do that? So I came out of that little mine shaft and my boss said, "Well, what do you think? Can we fill that with 2-inch rock?" And I said, "What? You want that shaft full of water pouring out of the ceiling, dark, you want that full of rock? How are we going to do that?" And he said, "Well, we'll get 20 guys in here and give everybody 5-gallon buckets and we'll just carry the rock in there and dump it and we'll fill that up." And I said, "You know how much rock that is?" And I hip shot it and I said, "That's probably 100 cubic yards." "Yeah, well, it'll take a while." And I said, "There's got to be a better way than that." And so I began to scheme and think about and engineer how we could fill that old, wet, rocky hole in the earth with basalt, clear to the top. And I came up with what I think now was one of the craziest ideas, and it set me up for the most demanding and dangerous and foolish 3 days' work I ever did. What I decided we were going to do, and I had enough authority to make these decisions, was we were going to build a little road right down to the bottom where that little stream came out, as close to the mouth of the mine shaft as we could, so an excavator could walk back and forth from where the rock could be dumped, 100 yards of it, I think is what we dumped up there. An excavator could walk down and dribble the rock onto an electric conveyor, and not just one electric conveyor, which, by the way, we could rent at United Rentals. I think they were, 10 or 12 feet long or 15 feet long, and they had a little 110-volt motor that would make a belt travel so that aggregate could be conveyed and dropped. And then I brought down a bunch of railroad ties, and I proceeded to crib up those conveyors so that one would dump onto the second, would dump onto the third, would dump onto the fourth, and bring the rock back. I also stretched blue tarps, little blue tarps, out and up against the ceiling and put them in place with 2x4s, holding up a tent, right? So the water that's dripping out of the ceiling goes off to the side and not down the back of my neck. I tried to forget about the spiders. I tried to forget about the fact that those conveyors cribbed up. If they fell into the water I was standing in, it would be a shocking development, right? I tried to forget about the fact that I was walking on rocks anywhere from the size of, your fist to the size of a wheelbarrow that had dropped out of that ceiling over the 60 or 70 years intervening. I had to put all of that out of my mind because I was driven by the challenge of making this happen, and it was a good job. I was making money and I had a young family, and they needed those paychecks, but they needed me too. So I don't know, it was somewhere between a combination of the challenge and the testosterone and thinking I was the only man that could do it, foolishly, and the opportunity to make some good money, and just doggone it, the will to do it, that overpowered my responsibility to stay alive. And I can remember for 3 days walking into that job thinking, I wonder if I'm going to live through this. That was stupid. It was stupid. But at the time, it seemed like the thing to do. So anyway, I have a scoop shovel, a snow shovel, and I'm back in at the end of the last conveyor. And I yelled out, plug them in. And those conveyors started to run, and I could feel the excavator walking down the hill. It was a big one, coming down with maybe a 2-yard bucket full of 2-inch open. I could feel it kind of shaking in the tunnel, and I could hear the water running over the top of me. And I knew that the rocks were trembling, and I could hear him dumping the rocks into the plywood sort of shield that I had tipped up. And here they came. And I would catch those rocks in that scoop shovel, that snow shovel, and throw them over my shoulder as far back as I could. And while I was coming back for the next load, they were dropping at my feet. And I would throw them, and I would throw them, and I would throw them. And I did that for 3 days. And one of the guys that was helping me, who was not a bad hand, he kept saying, you want me in there? No, I don't want you in here. I had this, I don't know why. I guess I do know why. I wanted the glory of having done it. And it exhausted me, and I was sore for a week. And the inspector thankfully realized that we couldn't fill the last 16 inches up to the lid. I just couldn't throw them that high and that far and pack it in. But we put a lot of rock in there. And as the pile would come closer, we would stop the presses and take down the tarps and unplug the conveyors, and they would come, a couple guys would come in, and we would manhandle the conveyor back out until I was down one conveyor, which meant I had to throw the rock further, and we worked our way out. And I don't know what the lesson here is, guys, except the impulse we have as young men can cause us to bite off too much, to just bite off too much. But sometimes you just got to bite off a little too much. And you chew, and you chew, and you chew. And God willing, you get to the end of it. Now, I don't recommend that on a daily basis. What I recommend is if you're asked to do something that you know has a good likelihood of hurting you, you say, no, sorry, not doing it. But those of us who have been in business for ourselves know that sometimes, a man's got to take a chance. And now, 20 years later, it feels kind of good to have packed that tunnel full of rock over 3 grueling days by myself. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.